Welcome to Effective Time Management, a workshop brought to you by the Student Development and Study Skills Service. Objectives. 1. Identify key factors in successful time management. 2. Identify workflow limitations and how to avoid them. Do you ever feel like this? And would you prefer to feel like this? What are the common scenarios? You need to identify in successful time management what the tasks are, what the criteria are, and the deadlines. When precisely do you have to submit the piece of work? It's really important that you identify workflow limitations and how to avoid them. For example, what is an appropriate time scale? What is essential and what is non-essential? Who do you need to communicate with and how often? And what are the main challenges? Are there any unknown variables at stake? Student, you would be managing quite a specialist range of pressures because you are essentially working in a commercial context, and quite often and frequently in a commercial contract, nearly in all instances in a commercial contract, but I realise there are variables from that. And at the same time, you need to balance and technical aspects of the role of the job with the commercial demands, and thereby you have to have an appropriate timescale in order to do that, to balance that in a healthy manner and a successful manner. But it's also really important that you're able to identify what is non-essential. So what do you need to communicate with, who do you need to communicate with, and how often? Now that's actually a very, very important decision to make, and identify who are the main strategic points of communication in the project that you are undertaking are absolutely important. What are the main challenges you face? And that could be broad. That is such a vast area potentially that you need to take tutorial guidance on that, because one brief is very, very different from the next. But it's important that you address commonalities between most briefs that you are responding to, whether it be a task at university or a task in the real commercial environment in the true economic sense. Are there any unknown variables at stake? So, the complexity of all the other moral and ethical unexpected variables that you might come across, but also particularly in relation to some of the more mundane terrestrial concerns that you might have, the more run-of-the-mill things like that. Sometimes a client's needs and demands and wants and desires can evolve over the journey of a project, and you need to be aware of that. So, to conclude and summarize this slide, what are the common scenarios? That is vast. That's a vast possibility, but they fall into certain categories. So you need to identify what the task criteria and deadlines are, and also to identify what the workflow limitations could be and how to avoid them. Identify key factors in successful time management. Tasks. What is the task ahead? Criteria. What specific factors, rules, guidelines, or expectations must the task fulfill? Deadlines. When is the deadline? When does it have to be complete? Is this an open brief, or is this a finite brief where you need to have a turnaround very, very quickly? Where can I find vital information relating to my modules? So we need to obviously balance this between commercial real-life expectations. It could be that you're balancing a multitude of concerns, and absolutely, there is no doubt that you will be. But it's important that we balance what is happening in the real world and what will be happening in your career, with the concept of balancing these needs as a student at USW. So, for example, specific answers to the queries about vital information can be found in a variety of places whilst a USW student. This ranges from course to course, depending upon the needs, format, or particular necessities of the course, the academic staff who teach you, and the multiple other variables. However, this guidance is concerned with general conventions, therefore check in the following places: your assignment briefs, your course handbooks, the module handbooks, or the Blackboard module pages that are relevant. Before writing, it's important that you establish, or talking in terms of writing perhaps a script or writing a plan or sketching out a response to an assignment, but there are commonalities in relation to the workload. Therefore, before you begin writing, before you begin creating, it is important that you fully assess and understand the task ahead. Think about exactly what is required, examine the title and identify the focus of the essay, and balancing that with the brief and the needs and the terms that are necessary to it. So you need to be very familiar with the subject matter. Examine the title and underline or highlight keywords which tell you how to tackle the assignment. So this relates to the brief. Before you start creating, before you start writing, you need to think about how you read through lecture notes on the topic to refresh your memory. Look at a dictionary or reference books to help in understanding unfamiliar terms. And if you are unsure about anything, talk to your subject tutor. Try brainstorming. Obviously, we're all very, very different, but many people benefit from brainstorming and mind maps. Using mind maps or point notes, i.e. 1, 2, 3, 4, to record what you already know about the subject can be really, really important. There is a theory called Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. It's slightly tangential to this slide, but it's important because it demonstrates that sometimes you can know already quite a lot of information about a subject, and you use that knowledge, that prior knowledge, as a building block for you to, in order to undertake and overcome challenges of a new kind. So, for example, if you have a new objective, a dissertation to write for the first time, or a brief to respond to, you can do that based upon lots of other prior knowledge as a healthy starting point. Collecting information prior to the project. So whether it be the dissertation or the film, you need to read through a variety of sources or watch a variety of sources. And these can include things such as textbooks, journals, newspaper articles, and also examine the internet sites relating to information for your dissertation. Or obviously there will be audiovisual applications and examples to offer. While the latter is a valuable research tool, it is important that you use reputable sites. So concerning particularly your dissertation, academic integrity is of the utmost importance. So please note that the internet data is not subject to the same kind of scrutiny as our books or journals. Therefore, we're talking about reliability here of information. Be proactive when you read. Be selective about the material you read and use. And that the same principle applies to audiovisual material that you are using. Being selective about the material you read and use is not only a scholarly habit, it's also a very professional habit. Okay, collecting information. So relating to the dissertation or the film, make full use of the index and the content sections of books and abstracts and journals. Skim read to get the overall gist of what you're trying to understand or what you're trying to project. Scan the material for any specific terms, phrases that you have noted during lectures. So this is where you begin to thread together the evidence that you are reading and the information that you have been taught. Collecting information. It is important to read or use everything, so it is useful to keep referring back to the assignment's question or title in order to keep your research focused. So this is no different from responding to the research title or question in the dissertation or responding effectively to a brief. Ask yourself two key questions. Number one, do I really need this information? Then ask, how will I use this information? And two, does it support or contrast with material that I've read by other authors? Recording information. Absolutely paramount, particularly important when you're relating to the dissertation. So it is important to keep a full and accurate account of sources, author, date, title, and publisher details, and web addresses and page numbers for your bibliography reference list at the end of the assignment, in this case the dissertation. This avoids wasting time chasing after missing bits of data at the writing up stage of your assignment. Make a list of the sources which you have consulted, make notes of general ideas. And then, recording information, copy down any phrases or ideas you may wish to quote. As when collecting information, recording information, you need to ask yourself, particularly when dealing with the dissertation, do I need this information? How will I use this information? And again, it is useful to keep referring back to the questions in order to keep focused. It may be a good idea to keep these sources separate, and perhaps by putting them in different folders or by highlighting them in different colours. It depends. This is a very, very personal response. These are suggestions and guidelines. They're not instructions. They are suggestions. Everybody is different, and it's really important that you bear this in mind because your approach might be quite different from somebody else's, but nonetheless there will be common threads in the way you approach an organised manner of effective time management. Recording information C. Take time to reflect on and evaluate what you've discovered so far and decide whether, for instance, your viewpoint has changed and whether you have clarified your argument. If you have enough evidence or example, have you considered alternative viewpoints? This last point is important if you are to present a balanced account and demonstrate a broad range of the subject. Sketch a loose structure to work within and based on the information you have gathered. That would apply to both projects that are ahead of you as a cohort. Planning your assignment. A. Assignment plans can help to keep you focused, and here are some suggestions for planning. Decide the approach you intend to take with regard to the topic. Decide the main points. Put them in the most logical order, and the points should follow a sequence that enables the reader to see how one point connects to the next. Set alongside the main points all the supporting evidence, examples, data, quotations, or illustrations that will be used to substantiate them. The assignment needs good supporting evidence in order to be convincing. How detailed you decide to make your plan is really up to you. Some people sketch out a loose open structure, whilst others go into far more detail. The next slide shows an example of a general plan. So here again, before I show you the example, it's important to emphasize the importance of adapting and developing a methodology of research and preparation that help you gain a sense of organization that suits your individual needs, your individual personality trait. Because we do tend to be different in this regard. It's important that you do something that is logical, whilst also complementing what you prefer. Your preferences are absolutely vital in this case, because these are personal notes to help you balance and manage time effectively. Let's focus particularly here on the dissertation. We could talk about a title, an introduction. Obviously, that can be dealt with on an individual level, but then let's focus particularly on the main body. The main body is where you present evidence for, or evidence against, and an evaluation of that evidence. Alternative theories could be evidence for, evidence against, evaluation of evidence, and possibly why alternative theories are not or are convincing. It might be a good idea to keep evidence in separate folders or use a colour scheme so that you can easily find specific pieces of information. So there is a suggestion in the latter part, and again we touch upon that personal idiosyncratic approach that we all have to study. Planning your assignment D. Example continued. The conclusion. A checklist for an assignment plan. So you need to ask yourself, is there a theme running through the assignment? Is there a logical progression? Are the links obvious? Is there sufficient relevant information to answer the question? And the conclusion continued. Is there any relevant information? Is the balance or emphasis appropriate? Is there any repetition? And does it answer the question? All of these queries help to structure the way that you manage your time, because you're not wasting your time focusing on things that are perhaps irrelevant or less objective and purposeful. So you have a delicate balance. So it's important that you answer yourself those relevant questions, because you are essentially responding to a brief. So time management plans. Here is an example of a chart. So on the one side, this is for a long period of 3 years. So let's move away from that. You could be working on a chronological bar, as we see in that first example, that spreads 3 years. Or you could be going into something else that's a bit easier. It's kind of like the project management infographics shown at the bottom. But planning ahead is a personal choice, unless this is part of the brief. Here are some examples to help you. So I've mentioned those two first, and then we're going to move on to another one. It could be this kind of approach suits you quite well. And I'm deliberately showing you a range of ways to illustrate and plan, whether you do this digitally or whether you do this on a piece of paper. It's up to you. You might even want to use an app. Some of these suggestions might not suit your manner at all, or your preferences. They're just ideas to help you get started about how you might plan and prepare for this. Here is another example. Many people like the workflow method. So this shows a workflow, and you can see quite easily, you start from what is measurable, or perhaps you might use a flow chart, and you might have to account for policies, particularly if you're working with people or young people or vulnerable groups. Issues, these are the things, the financial issues, client needs, and so on. What is your overall goal? What is the process? Transparency, statistics. Are there any statistics that are completely relevant to your job, whether you're doing the dissertation, the task ahead, I mean, as in the job, the dissertation or the film? There are different ways of approaching this. So for example, some people prefer a linear approach like this. This is chronological from A to B to C to D, or they prefer this pie chart, or they might prefer some kind of workflow methodology. Whatever suits you, make sure you write it or record it somewhere, so you have some way of doing it rather than just random post-it notes. Some people might actually benefit from that. But it's important that we recognize there are lots of different approaches. This one is a bit easier because it's easier to follow. It tends to suit the way we read. So if you have a plan in the purple area, I've deliberately blurred these out so that they can be applied to anything. You might have task 1 in the green, task 2 in the blue, task 3 in the red, task 4 in the orange, and task 5 in the purple at the top. You may even want to reverse the roles around. It doesn't matter. How you plan your work is a personal preference, is a personal choice. These are prompts to encourage you to think of a linear or otherwise method and the broad possible ideas that you could apply to planning and visualizing the tasks that are ahead of you. So it's important that you are shown a wide range of possible ways to approach time management. This workshop was brought to you by Student Development and Study Skills. You can contact us at studyskills.southwales.ac.uk. Please take a look at our website for further information. You can find us at studyskills.southwales.ac.uk.